All right. Our last speaker for this segment is my dear friend Darion Lowenstein. He graduated from high school at age 14 and worked his way up in the video game industry. From reviewing and testing to producing and directing to being an executive and CMO at companies like EA, Rockstar Games, Activision, and Scopely. In 29 years, he's produced and directed hits like Red Dead Revolver, Transformers, and War for Cybertron and Simpsons. Tapped Out, Pac-Man, The Walking Dead, the NBA Jam, and shipped 85 plus games that have generated over $6 billion in revenue. Let's give a big leap welcome to my friend Darion.
How's it going, everybody? Thank you for having me. Yeah, I think if you get anything from that bio, the biggest piece is I'm a huge nerd. I grew up a nerd. I love playing video games as a kid. Any gamers in the audience? Nice. I was always obsessed with entertainment. I loved television. I loved movies. I always knew that I wanted to work in the industry. Problem was, I grew up in a really small town in Drain, Oregon, a town of 1,000 people, and I had no connections to the entertainment world. I had very simple meanings. My parents weren't rich, and so I was trying to figure out, how do I make a career in entertainment? Luckily, my dad was my original publicist, and he, when I was 13, sent letters to all the newspapers in Oregon talking about how I was being homeschooled, I was trying to get a job in video games, I just started reviewing games. To my surprise, 2 of the biggest newspapers in Oregon came back and said, we'd like to interview you. Came out, did cover page stories on me, and ran those. When those articles ran, I got a call one day, and they said, hey, we'd like to offer you a job as a tester. Tester is an entryway into the games industry. And I said, I'd love to, except at this point, I'm now 15, and I can't get to your office, which is an hour away. Can we start when I get old enough to get a license and drive there? They said, sure, call us back. So the day after I turned 16, I moved out of home and started working full-time at Dynamics. I was very lucky because my parents homeschooled me, and so I graduated high school early at 14 and allowed me to basically start chasing my career. When I started working in the games industry, I immediately learned a lot. As an entry-level position as a tester, it's a way to get your foot in the door. It is not, unfortunately, sitting around and playing video games all day. That's what a lot of people, when they meet me, they're like, oh, you get to play video games all day. Like, oh, gosh, I wish it was like that. I wish it was easy and fun and chill. Unfortunately, like any job, as a tester, you are responsible for testing a particular game for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. And as opposed to just playing the game, you are looking for problems. You're working with the development team, and you're trying to fix those problems. So, as an example, if you play Call of Duty, and you're a tester on Call of Duty, you will be testing one map for 12 months, falling into holes, finding textures that are missing, things that are glitching. So it's not as much fun as you might think from the outside. People always like to ask me, what's the best project you ever worked on? What's the worst project? Well, the worst project that I ever worked on, I was 17, and the game was called Driver's Education. And for that game, I had to learn the driving rules for all 50 states, and then go through in a driving simulation where if you went over the speed limit, you'd get like an error message and it'd kick you out because it was like a driving test. It was painful and monotonous and terrible and boring and like all of the things. Now granted, the next game I tested after that was a game called Star Siege where you got to play these giant mechs and you just got to blow everything up. So like you find balance in the career, but it's not as much fun as some people might think. At 18, I was laid off as that job as a tester, and I had already started networking, and one of the best lessons that I learned early on in any career in entertainment is very much based on your network. Who do you know? Who you contacted with? Who have you met? Who worked with you and who likes you? Who will vouch for you and say, hey, I worked with Darion. He's a great guy. You should hire him. I had worked with someone who now was working at a company called 3DO, which is in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I was able to get my next job as an associate producer. And from that point, I continued to basically work my way up through the games industry. The next job I got was a big one. I got laid off again at 20 and started talking to a friend that I'd worked with at 3DO who is now at a company called Rockstar Games. They were hiring a producer, and that was a dream job for me. I loved Rockstar. Grand Theft Auto had just come out, super successful company. I ended up getting the job, and I ended up working there for 5 years. And that company taught me a lot, not just about game development and how to make a great game, but also how to work with people. At 20 years old, I was now producing my first game that was about 60 people. And I looked maybe 15. So when people met me, they'd be like, oh, you must be Darion. Are you the tester on the team? I'm like, actually, I'm the producer, and you're like an hour late coming in. So it was awkward a lot, but I learned how to manage people, how to work with people, and how to ultimately make what is a rock star game. The other side of entertainment that a lot of people don't talk about, but it does get in the news sometimes, is that it is not a 9-to-5 job. In my career, of all the game companies I've worked at, from EA to Activision to Rockstar, none of them have been you get in at 9 and you leave at 5. Most of them have been you get in at 10 and you leave when the work's done. Sometimes at 7 p.m. Sometimes at Rockstar, we would be working so hard trying to get a milestone done, to get a build of the game done, that I would sleep underneath my desk. So I had a routine where I would call my parents on my way into work every morning, and it got to the point at Rockstar a couple of years in when I would call them at 9 in the morning or 10 in the morning. They would say, are you going into work or are you leaving work? And often it was leaving work. If you want to pursue a career in entertainment, I have lots and lots of advice. I think the biggest thing is it has to be something that you are really passionate about, you really care about. I have worked with people throughout games, I've worked in TV and film, and I think the consistent line that I see from people who are very successful, and whether that's friends of mine who are pop stars and singers and bands, people who are directors, people who are actors, people who are game designers at big companies, they work their butts off. They are very, very hardworking. They are full of passion. They are full of commitment. And they're always trying to learn and grow and evolve. And I think that's one of the things that I love most about working in entertainment, is that it is not a field where you can just sit back and chill. It is a field where you have to constantly evolve and learn. In my career, I've had to go from company to company, and each time it's like learning a whole new language. It's learning how EA makes a game is very different than how Activision makes a game, is very different than how Disney makes a game. And each of those times that I had to sort of learn and evolve and really learn a new business, I gained a lot and I kind of grew as a person. I think in entertainment, if you don't feel that core passion, I wouldn't say go for it. Because the other thing that is the truth about entertainment that not everybody talks about, it's a really, really, really hard, really competitive industry. And even when you've had the most success, you're sometimes met with a layoff, a company closing. As you've probably seen in gaming, we've had a lot of layoffs over the last year. We had about 25,000 people laid off last year. The biggest game of my career, in my sort of mid-career, was called Transformers War for Cybertron. That was a massive, high-budgeted game. I had about 500 people working on it across 3 development teams. When that project was done, I got laid off, along with about 400 other people. And so here I was at what I thought was the peak of my career, and yet I'm now looking for work. And I decided to be adventurous and decided to go back to EA and work in mobile. And the reason for that was mobile was just starting to come up. This is like 2011. And I thought, I'll go and try it out. I'm like a console guy. I like to make console games, but mobile could be cool, could turn into something. Turned out to be a great move for me. I had 6 #1 games at EA. I learned how mobile games are made. And because of that, I was able to go from being a director of development at EA, and I was able to get my first VP title at a startup. And then I rose through the ranks of startups. I went from VP of development and production into my first C-level title, which was Chief Marketing Officer at a company called Gamblet. And then about 4 years ago, I formed my own consulting company. And the reason that I did that is, as a consultant, I can work with anybody because I've put in the time and effort and energy throughout my career for 20-some years to try and allow myself the freedom to have that ability to work with anybody. I think if you want to pursue a career in games, I recommend that you try and find ways to stand out. And this is probably advice that's generally true for most people who are job hunting or looking at starting a career in the next several years. Everything is super competitive. Every time I talk to friends, they're trying to figure out how do they stand out, and I think it's especially true when you go for your first position. So when I speak at colleges, they'll often ask me, like, what can I do to stand out? And I think that some of the lessons that I learned early was try to look for anything that you can do before you get that first job. So for me, that was reviewing games, contacting local newspapers, starting a blog, starting a TikTok, starting a YouTube channel, and as opposed to just being a fan of games, start showing that you can break it down editorially. You can understand and then show the world that you know the difference between just playing a game and actually building one. Download Unity, which is a free tool. Start learning the free lessons. There's so many ways that you can build yourself up so that when you do finally get that first phone call, that first meeting, that first setting with someone, you have things that can help you stand out from the 5,000 other applicants that are going for that same position. A lot of times when I'm interviewing people, I don't always go for whoever is best on paper. When I'm interviewing someone, I look for people who have a lot of passion, a lot of drive, and have done their research. A quick example would be I was hiring a producer at the last company I was at about 5 years ago, and the gentleman came into the office, sat down, we talked for about 10 minutes, and I said, "So, what do you think of our games?" And he's like, kind of trailed off. And I was like, "Well, did you play any of our games? Did you download them? Did you check out our website?" He didn't. He had a friend of the company, so he just thought, "Oh, this job's mine. I've got a great background." He came from a great company, had a fancy degree. He thought it was his. After about 15 minutes, I'm like, "Okay, thank you so much for your time. Take care." And he was like, "Wait, what? Like, this is it?" I'm like, "Yeah, you didn't put in the time to research. I have a really busy day. I have 20 people on my team that are working really hard right now. I don't have time for someone who clearly doesn't care." I ended up hiring a producer that had far less experience than that candidate, did not have the big fancy degree, didn't have the background that on paper seemed perfect, but that person, before the interview, had gone on LinkedIn and researched me. They had gone to the company, they had downloaded every game, they had played everything, they had researched the freaking hell out of it. So when they sat down, they not only had great questions for me about the direction of the company and the projects and things we were doing, but they also had a lot of great pointers, like, "Hey, I didn't really like it in this game when you did this. I didn't really like that. This part could have been better." And they actually had constructive feedback. The other thing that's been really fun about a career in entertainment for me is that it's opened a lot of doors to things that I never thought would have been possible because I tend to be the type of person that says yes to everything in a good, healthy way. I was able to, at my last company, I was able to learn how to direct commercials. The company needed commercials made. I met with a bunch of agencies. They didn't quite understand what I wanted to do, and I thought, my friend at the time was the head of production for Capitol Records, EMI. He did all like Katy Perry's videos and Jennifer Lopez's videos. And I said, "Hey, I need a really good music video production company. I have these ideas in my head, and I want to make commercials for my company." And so I ended up basically putting the ideas together, working with some great producers. I ended up directing a ton of different commercials. And I think by pushing myself and by working that extra 4 hours a day on top of my regular job, I evolved a skill set that was one of those things that I never really thought that I would be able to have the opportunity to do. Because of the way that I've pursued things, I've also been lucky enough to work with a lot of my favorite brands and a lot of amazing IPs that I grew up with. So Transformers was one that I loved as a kid. I've managed to make Pac-Man games. I've worked with a lot of the sort of dream games that as a kid I never thought like, that'll never happen. But all these doors have sort of opened up. My friend randomly said, "Hey, you're into directing now. Do you want to come to this little Q&A with Taylor Swift?" And I was like, "Wait, what? Sure." And later that day, I end up talking to Taylor freaking Swift for 10 minutes about directing. Like, it's insane what happens when you just say yes and you go for it and you apply yourself and you can follow all of these different paths in life. I think that's, yeah, I don't know if you want to do other questions or... Yeah, who has questions? I can drone on forever, but what would be interesting for you guys to know about a career in entertainment or gaming?
What was the most profitable game you worked on? How did that impact your career?
The most profitable game that I worked on. Technically, the project that I'm consulting on right now is the most profitable thing that I've ever worked on, but I can't say what it is because of an NDA. So before that, Simpsons Tapped Out made close to $1 billion. So that was a great experience. Transformers War for Cybertron made, I want to say it was like north of 600, 700 million. And those big IP projects were very impactful for my career because when you work with known companies and known properties and known IP, it's a small industry, and it's sort of like each one is like a little slab of cred to your foundation. And so those help you get the next thing. Every job in entertainment leads to the next thing. Every role that I take, I think about where does that put me for the next job, the next position? What kind of story can I tell so that when I'm down interviewing for something else or I'm meeting with the head of a studio to try to get another project, what can I tell them about what I just did? Because it is very much, I think, what have you done for me lately in entertainment in general? Yeah. It's a great question. It was, are layoffs in the industry going to stop? Is it going to get better? Is it going to turn around? That's a question that's on everybody's head right now. So at the last several game conferences that I've been to this year, the general motif was survive till 25. Entertainment is very much like a roller coaster. You have good years, you have bad years. The streamers have all been laying off people, the studios have been laying off people. I think the general expectation in the industry is that there is always a need for content, and that's where the money comes from, and just the other things happening in the economy. Next year will be better, there'll be more hiring, people will start to have jobs again. In the meantime, unfortunately, we're losing good people to other industries. That being said, I think this is a down year, but in general, if you look at the history of the last, 35 years gaming's been around, after a down year, it typically goes up. And during COVID, we had a massive up. We had massive hiring, we had massive amounts of money, massive amount of players, everybody's sitting home playing video games. So, we benefited from that. Now people are out seeing Taylor Swift, so their money is going in other places.
All right, one last question.
Oh my God, I can't pick that. I saw you first. What do I think of the direction of the games industry with all of the microtransaction and live service games? So this is a really tough one. It's a good question. I grew up playing games that you would spend amount of money on. You spend your $40, $50, $60, and you would have that game to be able to play forever. Over the last decade, games have been transitioning to where you have to either pay an amount of money and then you still spend more on microtransactions and gear upgrades, etc., or you download the game for free and then you have to pay for literally everything that you do. As an original gamer, I love the days when I could go and make a game and sell it for an amount of money and everybody is happy, right? Unfortunately, the reason that so much of the industry is transitioning to that free model, and it's going to continue to push in that area, is that is how the majority of money is made. So as an example, Fortnite makes several $billion a year, right, selling skins. So when you compare that to, say, Call of Duty, which sells a game for 60, 70 bucks, and sells additional things, they make about $1 billion in 3 days, and then the rest of the money kind of ekes out through the rest of the year. There's very few people who can afford to spend the money to build a big game and not have additional revenue planned, right? The average cost of a console game right now for a big AAA game is 200 to 300 million. You can make a smaller game for 50, but the majority of stuff that you guys probably play or see or hear about or is in popular media or they make movies and TV shows on, like Last of Us, it's several $100 million to make. So as a company, when you are looking at the risk, you have to try and amortize that and say, hey, like we need to have as many ways to monetize the audience and keep the game going for 5 years. And the only way to do that is by having a game that goes on and on and on forever. So yeah, I think unfortunately it's only going to get worse if you don't like microtransactions. But you'll get more stuff to play for free.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Darion.
Thank you.